Fiona is going to tell us about Mars and Venus in the garden, and I gather it's a light-hearted and it sounds really interesting talk, because I can't quite understand how it relates to electricity and motors, which apparently is part of it, but that's what she says it's going to do. So I'd like to hand you over to Fiona Hopes.
Fantastic introduction. It's an honour and privilege to be stood up the front here to give a talk to the Trust. So often you find me behind the teams, but not today, which is wonderful, and very grateful to other people stepping in there. So before I start the talk, you obviously know that my background is in gardening and gardens and garden design and landscape and dirty stuff like soil, of which without we would not be here. But it's just a warning. I was brought to a full stop on one presentation I gave one time, and somebody said, "It's all your opinion." And I went, "Yeah." So be warned. Be warned. My talk is full of generalities, bad science, personal opinion, unverifiable statements, and old wives' tales. Right? As you will find all the talks here, and in fact everything. And to paraphrase the title of a book on my shelf by a man called Bob Frisell, nothing in this talk is true, but it's exactly how things are. And I do apologise, I do use notes. I add to them, but I do use notes. I don't speak often enough to completely ad-lib. So, as you listen to me speak, there's another warning that goes with this. Well, not warning, suggestion. You know when you go into a supermarket, you take a supermarket trolley, and you go around the supermarket, there's all these products up on the shelves. You don't take everything, right? You don't fill your supermarket trolley to this overflowing with absolutely everything available. You take what you need. And maybe one or two things you haven't anticipated, but you take predominantly what you need at that moment. And that is the same with all these talks, all these presentations. Take what you need at the time. And you can always come back for more, because there will be another Gatekeeper conference to stretch your grey matter. But the bottom line is, you take what you need, you stand in your own personal truth as to what you want. And that's something that kept coming out as I went. Now you'll find in my talk, I jump around a lot. I jump from topic to topic, and in the end, we end up where we actually want to be, I hope. So, and I thought, since I said we're going to have some old wives' tales, so let's start with the first old wives' tale, which is copper repels slugs and snails. Anybody heard that? You put your copper bands around. Any idea why? No. Does it work? It might do. So within the best tales, there's always some truth and some fabrication. Now, let's go back to really first principles. Anybody know how an electric motor works? And this is the bit that I've got to fire it. Yeah. Now, do you remember when you were at school, you'd play with magnets and iron filings? And you'd play and get that funny sort of shape with, north and south, generally. And the Earth is a jolly big, it's got an iron core, it's a magnet. And we know we've got the poles on the Earth, and it's really a big magnet. And there's another way of doing it. And the magnet, there's your Earth, and it spins round. We know our Earth is spinning round. So the shape that it makes is a torus. I forgot, I've got a few props somewhere. So most of my props you can just pass around. Now we get toruses in everyday life. That's the nitty ice of doing that. Not too tasty. But, you know, you'll find them everywhere. And that's the image of our spinning earth. So, and when you get the magnetic field like that, you actually get an electric field generated as well. Well, that's the spinning field. Because the earth, it's all messy on the earth. It all works, but it's all messy, so pretty. We have something called Maxwell. He was a big scientist, and he had what he called his left-hand rule and the right-hand rule. And where you get a magnetic field, you get a motion. So we've got a spinning earth travelling around in space. We get an electric current generated as well. So we have two sets of fields on the earth, an electric field and a magnetic field. So, and that's just basic good bad science. Anyway, so it's electricity and magnetism and movement are all tied up together. So this, the electricity and magnetism create the field which are measurable. And the earth is made of rock, made of water, lots of different types of rock. Water in rock has different conductivity. The electric and magnetic fields do all sorts of strange things. Not straightforward, but they're there. And they get called, by the people who can sense them, of which pretty well everybody on Earth can, is dragons. So, and they're in, you know, they're everywhere. And we call them ley lines, lays, dragon currents, you name them, they're there as dragons. So in every culture you get all sorts of different dragons. I'm not as efficient at Peter, I can't tell you where any of these come from, but there's some rather nice dragons. And you notice that they're all sinuous. You know, they all flow. The dragons flow. So I thought you could have a couple of dragons to play with. This is a classic bad taste Hong Kong dragon. So I have a few dragons. But you see, we have them everywhere all the time. And they're there all the time. So they're our earth energies. And of course they are measurable and observable. So there's another one. Some of them are very fierce. You know, you cross their paths with impunity. And you even get circular dragons, there's the Ouroboros. But you also get circular lays. So that's actually the circular lay here is actually in the Cotswolds, and it's got chipping Camden somewhere in there. That was research done by David Furlong, so it's slightly exploded large. But we do get circulars as well as straight and weaving and everything. So we have lays everywhere. So to measure them, you need one of those. But actually, those are more efficient. Or you might want one of those to measure your dragons. But they're in every culture, they're everywhere. So put that to one side. Earth is an electric motor, and that's how come we're generating all the dragons, the earth energies. Now let's have a look at some metals. The earth's made up of all sorts of chemical stuff, and metals we use all the time. So let's look at the first thing, which is iron. Let's have a think about iron. So every piece of iron, like a magnet, which is iron, has its own magnetic field. And a smaller piece of iron has a small bit of magnetic field, you know, and some are larger than it. And of course, whenever you move a piece of iron or steel, you're generating an electric current. However small, you know, it's generating electricity. But though it's a generator of electricity, it is not a good conductor of electricity. And human beings, of course, what have you got in your blood? You've got iron as hemoglobin, right? So we have our own electric and magnetic fields, which means we are independent of the Earth's electric, sorry, that's the symbol for iron. Forgot to put it. So we're independent of the Earth's magnetic field. We can function. We have what's known as free will. In other words, we are functioning separate to the energetic fields of the Earth. So that's shows the field, but actually it's more like that around a human being. It's a three-dimensional field. We're back in the torus again. So we are autonomous. We have our own electric fields. We're autonomous and have free will. Now let's look at copper. That's the symbol for copper. And it's a good... It's all right, my brain went dead then. Nothing new. Copper is a very good conductor of electricity. Use it for wires. Look in the middle of wires, you'll find it's copper down the middle. It's very good conductor. But because it conducts electricity, it doesn't have its own magnetic field. You can wave copper around and it won't generate electricity. Electricity will flow through it, but it doesn't generate electricity. Now, our favourite friends have copper in their blood as hemocyanin. So it's there, heme is blood, cyanin has got the copper in. And they are totally dependent, have another one, on the Earth's, magnetic and electric field. They flow with the Earth energies. They're not autonomous. They have no free will. They cannot override it because they have copper in their blood. So I've just got some nice, very beautiful creatures, and they do a lot of good. They're very, very sensitive to the energy fields of the Earth. And they're subject to and affected by the lines of the spinning Earth. That's why I say this is a talk about slugs. And they're known as gastropods. I don't know whether you know that. Because gastro and pod, they have their mouths and their feet. It's because they slide along and they absorb through the bottom of their body. So they are gastropods. So if we go back into the garden, the diligent gardener, for want of a better term, will plant, will do all sorts of things, very often with iron and steel tools. I won't throw this at anybody. And you're busy. Well, I didn't have any trowel, but I shall see why I haven't got steel. So iron and steel tools. And of course, we know what iron does. We just said, as you turn the soil with your iron and steel, you're leaving a magnetic signature because this has a magnetic field. And in other words, you're disrupting the Earth. For want of a better term, you're upsetting the dragons. And they don't like being upset. I do have another funny sort of thing. I have weird things kicking around my car. But a lot of tools that you'll find are iron and steel. So you've gone out, you've done a bit of planting or whatever you're doing, using your iron or steel, your wonderful stainless steel trowel that you were given for Christmas. Okay, there you are, doing your work with it. You go away, and the following morning, what do you find? It's been supper to the gastropods. So that is really not what you want. The slugs and snails come out at night. They sense, because they have no free will. They follow the Earth's energy lines. You've gone and broken the Earth's energy lines. You've disturbed the dragons. They've come along and they sense this disruption. And they come along to heal the Earth's energies. That's one of their main roles, is healing the Earth energies, along with clearing up all the rubbish and nasty stuff that gets left for us. And they come along and they tidy up. They sense that disturbance as they mend the local energy fields, and they go out, oh, brilliant. work tonight and then somebody's left us a snack. And that they tidy it up for you. So, the enlightened gardener, for want of a better term, will use copper tools. And you'll see that copper tools are my favourite tools that I use. Because copper is a conductor. So as I dig the soil or move something using my copper tools, I'm not breaking those earth energies. Those earth energies will go through the tool that I'm using. It's a conductor. It doesn't leave a magnetic disturbance in the soil. And so there's no magnetic or electric field disturbance to attract the slugs and snails. So they don't stop slugs and snails, but they do limit the damage, damage limitation. The gastropods will sense there's been a disturbance, but not in the way that you get with iron and steel. So they will note the local energy signature and come and repair it, but it's not disturbed in the same way. So, is the old wives' tale true? I've got it.
Yeah.
To an extent, yes. So let's have a look. See if let's have a look at a bit of astrology and alchemy. Because we have to bring a little bit of alchemy into it. Now we said that's the symbol for iron. But what else is it the symbol for? Mars. And what else? Male. It's the yang energy, isn't it? It's your male sign. Not surprisingly, looking at that. Taking the Peter's theme. It's a very good way to remember it. If you ever get stuck with your symbols, that's a very good way to remember. So it's the male sign, it's Mars, and it's iron. And it's a fire sign, it's that will, that drive, that fire of spirit. And then that symbol is, of course, the symbol for copper, Venus, and the female. So we have those two. So hence, with the iron tools and the copper tools, we have Mars and Venus in the garden. Sad. But what about the serpent? What about the serpent? Who's got the Chinese dragon? I thought that, you can see it. The serpent with the apple. You know that if you cut an apple horizontally, you get a pentagon, which is the sign of Venus. And it's, Eve had the apple, and the serpent, of course, was the earth energies. So you can look at it that. Another take on that story is to look at it as an earth energy story. So we have Mars and Venus and the dragons in the garden, serpent. So let's have a look at a bit of history. Well, actually, to use Sig Lonegren's term, it's not history, it's mystery, because it's myth, it's history, and it's a mystery. So I thought when you coined the term mystery, I thought, on the nail there. So pre-Iron Age, and this is generalities and bad history along with bad science. Pre-Iron Age, so you're talking about the Bronze Age, Neolithic, Paleolithic, whatever lithic you want. Well, lithium is stone, so stone age. As far as we know, or not, we can guess, the cultures were predominantly matriarchal. They weren't always 100% convinced on the male, female, and who was the father, but they definitely always knew who was the mother. The tribes tended to be nomadic or land-based in some way. They tended to be predominantly non-violent. I mean, there was the population levels were such that there wasn't the competition for land in the same way as later on. They had generally enough food, and because they had enough food through a combination of hunting, gathering, nurturing the land, working totally in harmony with the earth, they tended to have leisure time as well, which is something that disappeared. And they were much more egalitarian. The women were the community. It was men and women completely. So as we gradually went into the Iron Age, and it was a gradual transition, the cultures became patriarchal. So we've got our symbol for Mars, became patriarchal, became agricultural. As agriculture developed, of course, you developed a culture of overproduction. We had people who had and people who had not, so it became hierarchical. The haves, same as we have now, because we're in the same culture. We have the have and haves not. It became violent because people would fight over the resources that they'd saved. They could store food. There was overproduction. With the increased efficiency of using iron tools, they could store food. So it meant you got a population explosion. You got communities growing. And so you got the development of a culture that we live with people who can store food. And now we send food all around the world, and but the have and have-nots of an agricultural thing. And of course it was hierarchical and violent. It was a gradual change. It wasn't like somebody flicked a switch and so we got it. It's like they leapt into it there. They had this habit of doing it. It wasn't like there was a sudden switch from copper to iron. It was gradual. As the iron took over, iron gave more efficiency in the ploughs. I mean, you're talking about ploughing the land. It was much more efficient. But it also started the destruction of the earth, the destruction of the soils. And we'll go on to that. So, but to digress slightly, there was a lot of research work done by a man called Victor Schellberger. There you go. That's the only bit I put letters on. And he did a lot of research work. He was an Austrian in the early 20th century. And he put off, or in fact didn't go to university, his teaching environment was the forests. He was a forester, and he...
Gone again.
Gone again. And he was an observer of the living world. He saw the earth as a living entity, with water being its lifeblood. And he did an awful lot of research, of which I will not touch on, but I can highly recommend that you read up about. And Roma had some books, has had some books by a man called Alec Bartholomew, who has written extensively about Victor Schellberger in a way that we can take it on board. He recognised two types of magnetism in the earth. There are two types. One is the magnetism...
I'm going to get some more batteries.
One is the magnetism that occurs in living things, biomagnetism or diamagnetism. And it's a natural form of magnetism, and it's related to the metals of copper, bismuth and gold. There are other magnetism, the magnetism we deal with, ferromagnetism, the magnetism that is used in electric motors, dynamos, and for the generation of electricity, which is the magnetism I was talking about earlier, is ferromagnetism. And in nature, it's ferromagnetism that causes the breakdown of substances. It disintegrates the water particles into hydrogen and oxygen. And of course, all the things that come through the soil in the water. So, and of course, the related elements of ferromagnetism, of course, is iron, nickel, and cobalt. So, the destructive form of magnetism is ferromagnetism. Now, that was just one very small amount of research that Victor Schauberger did. He was amazing. His thinking was absolutely incredible. But like with so many people at the time, and happens now, good research gets taken and twisted. So he worked with ploughs. He could see, his research work said that steel ploughs damaged the soil. After a while, the productivity of the soil drops dramatically with the use of steel ploughs. And because they generate magnetic and electric currents in the soil, they're steel, we know that, and they decompose the nutrient content of the soil. And of course they leave traces, like all metals run through soil. Iron and steel has a lot of friction in the soil. It creates heat. You get little bits of steel in the soil, which then rusts. So the water molecules break down, give you water loss in the soil, and contaminates the soil. The rust contaminates the soil. Whereas copper tools and ploughs are beneficial to the soil. The traces of copper are good for the soil, good for the plants. It increases the water content and nutrients, and so of course you get better crops. And Victor Schauberger developed something called the golden plough, which is a steel plough. It's coated in bronze, which is, I'll come on to this, an alloy of copper. It's sort of like 95% copper. It was bronze covered. And it was a very clever design because the soil was turned over 360 degrees, completely back to where you started. So, something that I, feel strongly about, and the no-dig brigade, Charles Dowding and all the people who espouse no-dig, you don't turn the soil, you put... Soil has air-breathing microorganisms in the top, and the anaerobes, they're not air-breathing, further down. And when you turn the soil over, you put the anaerobes in the air, which they don't like, because if they don't breathe air, they don't like being in oxygen, and you put the aerobic stuff underneath. So that's why digging is so destructive to the soil. You destroy the whole microbial structure of the soil. So this, in turning it through 360 degrees, was not destructive of the soil structure, and yet it still loosened the soil surface. And Victor Schauberger mimicked the mole and how moles work. He was always copying nature. So, and he got excellent results with this. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, it was expensive to produce, but he got, really fantastic results with using the golden plough as opposed to the normal steel plough, which doesn't turn the soil in that 360 degrees either. But, and this is the story that goes on and down current times, he'd been sponsored by the Ministry of whatever, Agriculture, whatever, because he was Austrian. I don't know where he was doing his research, but it was, I think, in Austria. And the ministry withdrew their sponsorship. And why? Big bribes from the people who were producing nitrogen fertilizer. So the golden plough got lost into the depths of history. I mean, another one has been made since by Jane Cobalt, who retails the copper tools. and she's worked on that and everything. But of course, it's expensive projects and you need sponsorship and everything, and so it's gone no further. But what an amazing tool, you know, that we could use. We could take into, you know, we could take into big agriculture using a proper plough that actually nurtured the earth rather than one that destroyed the earth, and get the productivity. It's always possible. A few other ideas from Victor Schauberger before we move on is that everything in nature is either in growth or in decay, rusting. You see, an iron is not good for growth. It's always in decay, so it's going to encourage decay. It's always rusting, whereas copper encourages growth. Growth occurs in cooling conditions. How about the archetypal yin energy of cooling, damp, you know, which is what applies with copper. Whereas decay occurs in warmth, in fire. Just think your compost heap gets hot as it decays. So you've got decay in heat. They go together. Heat encourages the breakdown of constituents. And of course the iron and steel creates friction, creates heat, creates breakdown in the soil. And copper and bronze have very little friction and don't create heat in the same way. Iron is a sparking metal. So you can get, you know, if you hit iron on a stone, you know, you'll be digging away, you hit a stone, you likely as not get a spark off it. And spark, of course, is the discharge of energy. It's fire there. So again, you're creating fire with your iron tools. And of course, this discharge of energy, again, breaks down the water, depletes the groundwater, and copper is non-sparking. So let's have a look at copper and iron. I can have that for the moment, we'll get on to that. Iron is in a state of decay, in rust. It's a base metal, it doesn't encourage plants to grow. It's a noble metal. It's related to silver and gold, and I suspect platinum as well. It's one of those types of metals, whereas iron is a base metal. Copper is very soft, so you have to add something to it to stabilize it. And if you add a little bit of tin to it, you make bronze. And that was what was commonly used and still is to make bronze. It's an alloy of, I think it's about 95% copper and 5% tin. That's why tin was so valuable. Why did Joseph of Arimathea said to have come to Cornwall? It's for the tin.
For the pasties.
And pasties. Yes, thank you for that. Yeah. If you stabilise copper with zinc, which is the other one, you make brass. And of course brass is used for so many things as well. But it doesn't have the same, as much softer. It doesn't get used for things like in the way that bronze does. But you'll find brass. How many people have got brass door handles? You know. And there is said, because it's the type of metal, it's a noble metal, and you know silver is used as an antimicrobial. Well, brass and bronze do the same. So your brass door handles are actually very good, like to have on your toilet doors, because they're antimicrobial. So bring back the brass door handle. Copper and tin are very rarely found together. In fact, I don't know where they might be found together, as ores. Now, copper is found as copper, and it's copper ore, and it can be extracted in a cold process. It does not need heat. And so manufacture of bronze requires the tin, requires working. Bronze is worked to produce the bronze, you know, the bronze. But to get the tin, you've got to trade. So it requires cooperation. So a bronze-based culture, in the Bronze Age and before, needed cooperation to be able to produce the bronze. And So that goes back to how the cultures were. Bronze is harder than iron as such and can be worked cold. But iron is much easier to process. You can get the ore, you heat it up to great temperatures, and you can get the iron to flow. So you have to add heat to iron, and then you work it again to get steel. And steel is harder than bronze. So you have this hierarchy of iron, bronze, and steel. So the introduction of steel took our culture way on really quite fast. So copper is an excellent conductor of electricity and heat. It doesn't spark, it doesn't corrode easily, that's why they use it for water pipes. It's antimicrobial, like silver and gold. It's non-magnetic, it's used in the computer industry a lot. It's recyclable, and it's recyclable without heating it. It's weakened by heat. It's found pure in the earth, and it burns blue and green. Now, if you happen to have a wood burner, or you burn your Christmas paper after Christmas, you can tell that those shiny papers where you've got copper in them, because your bonfire will come out, or fire will burn with blue and green flames. So you've got Venus in your fire there. Yeah. Whereas iron is hardened by heat. It's found as an ore and it needs smelting, so you're adding heat again. It's magnetic. It has a short lifespan because it rusts, and it burns red and orange. So, there's a short chemistry lesson. So you have physics, chemistry, and gardening all in one go. So we've got very clearly Mars and Venus in our garden, and we can work with them. But what about the other planets? Where do we go from there? Well, the most... Actually, how long have I got, and how long can I elaborate on this?
Probably how long the batteries lasted. About 10 minutes in theory.
Right. Well, our nearest and dearest planet, for want of a better, of course, is the Moon. The biggest influence on the Earth after the Sun. The Sun gives us our days, we're going around the Sun, so it gives us our days, our seasons, we're going round at a funny angle, so we get, especially this far north, we get our seasons, and everything from going round the Sun. But the Moon, what about the Moon? She's there up in the sky, and affects all water, all fluids, because the gravitational effect of the Moon pulls all fluids. Now you look at the Earth, and what's the percentage of water on the surface of the Earth? Is it something like 80% or something? We rely on our oceans. We should be called ocean, not Earth. So the effect of the Moon is to pull the water, and everything that is on the Earth has got water in it. Even the rocks have got water in them. But human beings and plants and everything is full of water. So the effect of the Moon is on the water. So we need to be using, besides Mars and Venus, the effects of the Moon. And so we have a few more old wives' tales, which appear to be correct, to do with planting things that grow up in a waxing moon. As the moon gets bigger, it pulls upward growth, and you plant things and work with things that are beneath the soil, and when you've got energy going down on a waning moon, when the energy is going down. You don't do anything on a full moon. Why? Because it's slightly weird, as we know from the lunatics. That's why they're called lunatics, you know, and people are affected. The police know the full moon, and a day or two afterwards, that's when they get the silly things on the roads. Hospitals always have more people on a full moon than just after. So leave the garden well on a full moon. And of course, on a new moon, when the moon is between us and the sun, and we only see the back of the moon, the energy's way down. So it's time to be inside anyway. You know, don't do anything on a new moon either. So the moon controls all fluids. The earth, it changes the shape of the earth. The earth breathes in and out along with the moon. The earth isn't a round ball, it's a breathing, living ball that's in and out according to where the moon is. And of course the moon is at a funny angle to the earth, and the earth's at a funny angle to the sun, and it all makes a really interesting mess of energies. So it's good fun. That's why you have dowsing rods and you can play and find out all about these things. But there's a lot to do with the moon. And of course, when we look at the moon, we see the stars behind. And the moon travels through a set of 12 stars, 12 constellations, which we name. The zodiac, the zoo, it's a zodiac in the sky. And we have all the animals up there that are up there. And the way it's seen is that when you see the moon and behind it is a particular constellation. So say it's the moon is in Leo, which is a fire sign, that moon energy is going to have a flavour of the constellation that it's in. It's going to have that flavour. And so we get the different flavours of the constellation as the moon moves around in its circuits, in its cycle, its 28-day cycle. So some flavours are seen to be beneficial and some are not, and for some plants, and of course plants are said to relate to summer water, and your intentions. If you're looking to grow something that's all leafy, you want to have the moon in a water sign. Or if you're looking to have something, to encourage something that's all spiky and covered in bright red berries, you want to do something with blackberries or pyracantha, you do it when the moon is in a fire sign. And there's a whole lot of teaching to do with that, which I will take no further because it's a long story. But the moon is incredibly influential in the garden. So, a lot of homework for you lot to do there. Mercury, I hadn't got any insight as to how the dynamic of Mercury is in the garden. If anybody has any thoughts on this, I'd love to know. So, as we work our way out, there's the moon. Sorry, we could have had the moon. There she is. Beneath the goddess's feet. She's there working with the moon. That's the Magdalena energy, isn't it? So the earth and moon are intimately connected with the sun as the Christ energy and the moon as the Magdalena energy. They are married there in the sky. They have their dance, I suspect they fall out periodically, maybe that's the new moon, we don't know. We can make whatever stories we love. So there's Mercury. As I said, I don't know quite where it is. It's got the cross of Earth and the semicircle of the moon and the circle. Right, Mars, we've got Venus, we've got Mars. What about Jupiter? Expansion and growth, isn't it? Who's ruling that sheer energy, that driving of the expansion and growth? And of course Jupiter relates to things that do that. How about pumpkins? Real Jupiter, they get big. And of course where there's growth there's depth, so I'm sure somewhere along the line Jupiter's connected in with depth. But I haven't found any information on this. This is just like, this is where you get my opinion. So what about Saturn? Now Saturn's pretty much there in your garden. What about boundaries? Saturn is the ruler of fences and walls. You've got boundaries. So it's there making sure you have clear boundaries, teaching you the garden lessons of boundaries. And of course Saturn rules structures. So check your pergolas and trees, of course. The other thing that connects heaven and earth, other than people, we stand upright on the earth's surface, connecting heaven and earth, and Trees do the same. Real Saturn energy. Lots to learn from the trees. We have a lot. So once we've gone past the boundaries, what else do we have? Who else do we have? Uranus. I wasn't sure about Uranus, but sudden changes, new ways of thinking. Maybe you have original ideas about how you could completely change something in your garden. That maybe is Uranus having a little stir around then. Neptune. Well, he's got the three prongs of birth, sustaining and death. Is that all to do with Earth again? Interesting how many of them the planets are connected to Earth. They have the cross of Earth there. But Neptune, of course, is about dreams and illusions and visions and water. So maybe that reflecting pool that you've always wanted to put in is actually Neptune turning out. There's one in Cheltenham, down the parade. A real Neptunian pool with Neptune there. So, Pluto, sometimes shown as that. Pluto, god of the underworld. And where do we have the underworld in the garden? At the bottom of your compost heap. Pluto is the ruler of compost heaps and drains. The deep, dark, warm, generative. It's about change, about alchemy, about turning waste into gold. So we've got the planets there in the garden as well. So what about the rest? What about the sky, the stars and everything? Well, we know we have the moon and going through all the constellations. I didn't find, when I finally got onto my PowerPoint presentation that I was putting off for weeks, as you do, Peter Dawkins' lovely one showing all the constellations laid over the country. But we know that this lies over the earth in many places. They're the zodiacs that lie over the earth. We have one over Britain, there's one over Scotland, there's one over Ireland. And we can work with those energies in the landscape as well. We have the constellation energies, the star energies are there in the land. It's not in the usual position, but I wouldn't worry. And we get the path of the Milky Way. A lot of this is Anthony Thorley's stuff. He's done so much amazing research, and there are some good recordings of talks he's given to the Trust. But, we see it like that. There's the same picture there, the constellations, there's the Milky Way. Lots of things going on to do with the Milky Way and spiritual journeys and souls incarnating. So much to research and read. There we go. That's stunning. And imagine being Stone Age man, ancient man, no street lights to get in the way. Seeing that when you can go to the clouds every night. It's enough to make you just like you're away with the mystics, aren't you? Just amazing. So if you come back to the garden, what should we use? Should we have Mars or should we have Venus in the garden? And I have a tendency actually to, if I have to do big jobs that require intention and strength, I need Mars energy. And this is my personal stuff. I need to get out my big stainless steel fork to do something. But generally, that's what I call project work. What do I do first? I ask permission. Always, always, always ask permission. Talk with the earth energies. Talk to the dragons. Ask permission to do what you want. Set your intentions. They might come up with another idea. Be open, tune into those dragons and say, I want to do this. What do you think? I'm planning on doing it then. May I have your help? And if they're happy with you, they'll be there to help you. They'll divert currents, they'll do all sorts of things. So one, iron is no better than steel, than copper. It's using them with discernment and discretion. Because generally, you do not want to do, like, you don't want to be digging. Nature, always this thing, Victor Schellberger went back to it, all the time it's going back. Look at nature, look at the earth. The earth is amazing. She grows all this stuff and doesn't dig, and doesn't weed, and doesn't pick up leaves, and doesn't do all the silly busy work that people do in their garden. There's no need to fight your garden. If you go down the garden centre, it's the war on the garden. It's zap these weeds, zap these bugs. No, they have their place. What have they done to you? What have they done to you that makes you want to hate them enough to kill them? Leave them alone. They have every right to be there, and so they should be. And nature will balance it out. The yang and the yin will balance out. As Peter said, we need both in the garden. Leave them alone. Nature will sort it. Black fly, leave it alone. Give it 3-4 days, and then you'll find nature will have sorted it. So never dig, never turn the soil, keep the soil covered. Always ask permission, do all with respect. Always copy nature, and stand in your truth. You don't need what they try and say. Seeing that reminded me of a couple of lines out of a Leonard Cohen song, being sad, not that era, which said, "We are so small beneath the stars, so large against the sky." Yeah. So remember, the garden is the mirror of who we are. Acknowledge and work with all the influences of the planets and stars. We need to honour our role and place on the planet, and in doing so, we create heaven on earth.
Well, thank you, Fiona. That was absolutely fascinating. And I mean, what I love is you bring across the way everything is interconnected, and you know, even down to our gardening. And it sounds as though gardening is a lot simpler than I thought, if you don't have to dig and do all those things. And I love the thought of the slugs rearranging tidying up and repairing the energy lines. That's really good.